Hello, and welcome
Hi.
to the Argyle CISO Leadership Forum, Reduce, Reveal, Secure. My name is Michael with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we'll turn the floor over to our esteemed keynote speaker. Now, to ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. And without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Tolgay Kilz-Elma, Chief Information Security Officer, Argyle Advisory Board member. We're excited to have Tolgay for his keynote presentation titled Security Assurance, Building a Culture of Compliance. Tolgay, thank you so much for being here. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Well, thank you, everybody. Welcome. We have a good series of slides we would like to go through. Covering security assurance, building a culture of compliance, and I'm very excited about this. So let's talk about this, right? We have this big picture, and sometimes we lose this big picture, the mindset. We have processes, organizational structures, policies, principles, frameworks, information obviously is there, culture, ethics, important part, people skills, competencies. So these are the important elements, right, that we have in our organizations. And we want to make sure in our organizations, we have the right approaches, right mechanisms to address these, right? The policies and principles, very important, right? The certain set of practices, achieving certain objectives, producing certain outputs, achieving the overall IT goals, how we make decisions, right? The structure, how we translate the desired behavior into practical guidance, day-to-day activities in terms of managing, and of course guardrails, so that we know we're going in the right direction. So these are all important elements that we have in our organizations, regardless of the industry. But the thing is, sometimes we forget or maybe don't understand certain realities in regards to these given components. So the number one thing is, at the end of the day, we have to provide that stakeholder value, right? We have to realize that there's a reason why we have a business, what we do, why we do, how we do. So that element is there. So understanding how we create stakeholder value is very important. And again, there's also the distinction between management, governance. There are different roles, responsibilities, day-to-day operations, and at the highest level, building strategy and evaluating, directing, and managing those activities. And of course, this holistic approach that we have in our organizations, right? In our IT, and again, I'm covering IT, information security in the same bucket in a way. It's built from a different number of components, and they can be different types, and they need to work together in a holistic way to create that value. And each time something changes, one factor changes, the impact need to be considered. Of course, the enterprise, organization, industry, different needs. The context is different. We need to understand. So we need to tailor the enterprise to adjust our needs accordingly, right? And of course, end-to-end system. We need to make sure we cover everything from start to finish so that we have that big picture mindset. So, but the issue is, we have all these, efforts and, objectives and whatever you call it, initiatives, projects, and we have an issue in terms of, strategic alignment. Some are aligned, some are not aligned. And that's really what we're trying to address, right? We have the strategy at the top, and we have at the very bottom, let's say, information security, cybersecurity, right? And there's that issue, the gap, right? Even though we have all these things happening, right? We have limited resources, we move forward with these efforts, but some produce that value we like and some don't. And that's really the problem, right? That's what we're trying to address. Ultimate goal is really to make sure everything we do is aligned with the next level, and eventually gets to that strategy, right? So we have enterprise goals, information IT goals, information security cyber goals. Sometimes these are kind of mixed in together, information and technology and information security cybersecurity. But the goal is really, how can we do what we do? How can we create that value through this alignment, right? That's really the bottom line. So talking about the alignment, right? Stakeholder needs, that's what drives everything. With the external drivers, our stakeholders have certain needs. We as an organization, management or the governing body, we need to create the value for our stakeholders. We need to, optimize the existing risk. We need to optimize the existing resources we have, which are, limited. And through that, process, align it with the enterprise goals, which might be, maybe, creating competitive products. There's compliance, internal, external compliance aspects. There's this quality of information we utilize. Maybe it's the customer-oriented service culture that we're focusing on. Business continuity, right? Always an issue. How we optimize business processes and staff skills, competency, capability. Digital transformation nowadays is kind of number one priority, I think. So those are the type of enterprise goals that we have, and how we align these enterprise goals with information technology and information security goals, right? They need to align, and then eventually come up with certain objectives so that we can really creating those efforts and initiatives, and really how we can move forward in a cascading effect, supporting one level up, and eventually with that strategy, right, whatever that focus, addressing the stakeholder needs, right? So, and again, there's a question: how do you measure alignment in a dynamic environment? So that's a very good question. I think agility comes to in mind. So you have to be able to kind of ready. So there's a certain level of maturity, which we're going to discuss, right? So being prepared, proactive, right? That's really, I think, one way to address that. Things don't stay the same way. So dynamic nature of business, organization, culture, things happening. Look about, we've gone through this COVID process, right? This ambiguity, uncertainty. So being as agile as possible, to the degree possible. Some organizations are so complex. We're going to talk about those. So the question really is, are we doing the right things, right? Are we doing them in the right way? And are we doing them well? Essentially getting the benefits to our stakeholders. That's really the focus, that whole process. And of course, there are different ways, framework standards to do these things. Change management is one way, program project management, right? How you resource risk optimization, do those things. So essentially, the goal is really to get to that value delivery, addressing the needs of the stakeholders. And again, it's not an easy job, obviously, but once you kind of have that understanding about the challenges and opportunities, I think it becomes easier. So maybe a hypothetical example is, let's say you have this focus, right, at the highest level. Essentially it might be service, growth, cost, internal, financial, that strategy, right? What is the overall strategy driving, right, the needs of the stakeholders? Let's say it's a customer service. So that's our overall, focus, right? The enterprise goal, which there might be multiple, supporting that customer service. Let's say the goal number one might be business service continuity and availability, right? So underneath for that, goal, enterprise goal, business service continuity and availability, you might have multiple IT/information security, cybersecurity goals to support that enterprise goal. Maybe it's the delivery of services in line with business requirements, right? And again, when you kind of go through that structure, maybe the objective is really managing one of the objectives, right? Supporting this, one level up might be managing changes in IT changes, how we do those changes, right? Maybe it's about, requesting status reports, approving the change advisory board. So there might be multiple practice/activities that support that objective, which, let's say, managing the IT change, which support that goal of delivery of services in line with business requirements, the IT information security goal, and eventually the enterprise goal, and focusing on the customer focus. And of course, you have to measure everything, right? That's important. So KPIs, KRIs, those things need to be in line. Maybe the risk, the key risk might be the business disruptions, and the key risk indicator might be a number of business disruptions due to IT service incidents. So this is really a model in a way that you can move forward. And there are standards, frameworks out there that utilize these type of things. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, I guess. But it's all about the culture, right? That's really what we're trying to focus, and how the organization handle different elements, right? The behavior towards taking risk. How much risk does the enterprise believe that it can absorb, right? Maybe towards policy and compliance. Are we a compliant focused organization, maybe non-compliant? So what is that behavior towards policy compliance, right? What do we do about that? Of course, there are always efforts and projects, and they're not always successful, right? The outcomes, the expected outcomes. So from those failures or negative outcomes, what do we do? Are we a learning culture, or are we a blaming culture, like finger pointing, right? The risk taking, again, conservative or risk taking or risk averse or informed risk decisions. So these are different elements, right, that impact our approach in terms of how we, through that alignment, create that value for our stakeholder, addressing their needs. Okay, so risk culture, there are different elements, obviously. So what is that, right? I mean, we always talk about the values, beliefs, the norms. That's obviously one way to, define it. Maybe, the best way to, best indicator of an enterprise risk culture is how it makes decisions on how to respond to various risks, because this business is all about risk, right? Risk is inherent. If we're in business, risk is there. So the risk culture, it reflects a balance between weighing the negative, positive outcomes and the regulatory requirements, right? That compliance. And how do you find that balance, right, between negative / positive outcomes and the need for compliance, regulatory elements, so that you're moving in the right direction and yet still creating value, right? The behavior towards taking risk. What are the norms, attitudes, right? How about policy? I mean, do we have a policy that exists but is not followed? Do they drive the behavior, right? Are they easy to read, understand? Those type of things, right? So there are all these things that are part of risk culture, which really impact the way we do business, the way we deliver value, the way we move forward with different IT / information security efforts, forming that cultural element. So I mean, talking about anything we talk about, right? There's always a maturity element. So we have to talk about maturity. There are different phases that we have to go through, moving forward, making continual changes. And depending on where you are, right, you might be at a different maturity level. As I said, I'm a big believer in terms of following standards and frameworks for ongoing learning. So you cannot really accomplish compliance unless you're at a certain level, right? With everything you do, with every step, a little minor improvement, our goal is really to move to that next level of maturity. That's really the goal. By maturing, we're moving towards the chain and making sure we're delivering more value, addressing our stakeholder needs. So it is very important to know about different maturity models, where you are in the maturity level chain, and maybe doing some assessments so that you know what you have to do, what you need to do to move to the next level, right? And of course, how this relates to the organizational culture relating risk. Again, similar to the maturity levels, whether the culture is really vulnerable, that I don't care culture, reactive, there's that blaming culture, right, finger pointing, the compliant culture, or maybe a proactive, right? You're at that level, which is good, ownership of issues and moving forward, delivering more value, and a resilient way of life culture, right? These are different steps, which is important. Look, if you look at these different phases, kind of map to that maturity levels, vulnerability, people don't care, right? There's that negligence. Training, either little exists or no training exists, right? Poor communication or no communication. And then in a reactive blame culture phase, there's that ad hoc inconsistencies that exist all over the place, right? Risk assessment, which we know should be a part of our culture, part of the organization, is reactive. You're in a reactive mode. Focusing on what happened, right, rather than how we can move forward and address the issues, but what happened, who did it, those type of things, whose fault it is, right? That's the reactive blame culture, and it has negative implications, obviously. In a compliance culture, there are different elements, but it's really as required process definition. You have procedures and process in place, and it's just all about following those rules, right? There's this legal compliance, very important. So you don't have that level of flexibility, right? People are very, there might be, issues that you might want to address, but because of the existing procedures, policies, the focus is really on, being compliant. Am I following the procedure, right? And again, moving forward, proactive is accountability, responsibility defined properly, right? Open communication. These are type of, good elements. And then the resilient way, that accountability and responsibility is all communicated, understood. It's a self-regulating organization, and everything we do, decisions, they're all risk-based decisions. So, and again, this kind of maps well to the, maturity frameworks out there. So culture killers, I mean, it's really these issues, right? When you see them in your organization, and having one of these doesn't necessarily mean the culture is in danger, but it does mean that when you see these different negative areas, you need to address them, right? Otherwise, it'll impact the other issues, and together it'll harm the culture, right? Negativity is one of them, right? It can be viral, so you can really address those people and make sure to slow down the process, right? They impact in a negative way. So you need to change that attitude and address it. There's the rumor mill, right? The gossip. Make sure you hear and provide the right information, the authoritative source, so that there's that communication issues that you need to address. Bureaucracy, very important, depending on size, complexity. So the more layers you put into it, it just adds to the overall decision making process, value delivery. So trying to flatten out the organization as much as possible, I think, is a good thing. Lack of transparency, always an issue, right? We know you want to make sure decisions, communications, and people know what's going on, and you communicate it very openly. And threatening job security. This is one of the, I think, ones that impact the whole culture of people negatively. If people don't feel comfortable, if people don't feel secure in their jobs, they won't be able to create that optimized outcomes. There's a question: how do you get employees motivated to point of moving culture needle in the right direction? Excuse me. Well, again, culture is not an easy thing to impact. It's a change management, obviously. Changing culture, it's not like a project or program. You can say, okay, we're going to do this, put these resources. It takes effort, but everything starts, I think, at the very top. You need to make sure you have that top level, engagement and, commitment, right? Very important. And it's not a, short amount, short, time frame that this is going to take place. It's a long duration, right? It takes, years to change the culture of an organization, to impact people, right? So understanding the mission, the vision, the values, I think, is a good thing, right? Using those and making sure people are aligned with those mission, vision, values, and that alignment that I mentioned. Making sure you address your workforce related issues. Learning is a big one, right? People need to feel comfortable. Job security. There are a lot of things that might be impacting, but I think it all starts at the top. Leadership is very important. Walking the talk, that's always a thing. So again, it just takes time. Planning obviously is their strategy. Open communication, the things that I mentioned, right? Being transparency, very, very important. So let's move on. Excuse me. So when we talk about this, from a cybersecurity, information security perspective, there are all these areas that fall under IT, that fall under information security, and how you kind of comply, whether it's internal or external, right? We have a lot of these different sub areas, right? And this is just an example, a list of examples. So the goal here is really to make sure that we understand we have these, areas that we need to address, right, from a security perspective, to make sure what we do, right, delivering service products, and how we do it in a secure, private way, and make sure it's compliant with internal and external policies, right? So it's important, again, back to the communication aspect, back to the transparency aspect, to make sure we have these in place, and policies, procedures, so that we're moving in the right direction. And of course, back to the organizational structure, right? It is very important that we have the right people, the right structure, reporting mechanisms, right? Who's responsible, who's accountable, doing what, right? And who are we informing, who's being consolidated, providing the right input, right? With the right background, right SME. These are very important, because business is all about, decision making to create that value. with in a risk environment, right, with limited resources. So that's why when you make a decision, sometimes you just don't have the luxury of making wrong decisions because of the certain industry, certain impact on the stakeholders. Healthcare, for example, right? Think about making that one wrong decision might be a deadly, outcome. So think about all these, roles, responsibilities, the RACI matrix, that the way we know it, right? Accountability and responsibility. Are these documented, communicated? The right people know what they're supposed to do in under what circumstances? Very, very important. It impacts the whole decision-making process. Excuse me. So, from that perspective, I think we need to think about how in IT, information security, what do we do? Do we have the right structure, documentation, right? When there's a problem, the people dealing with that, crisis or issue, do they know what they're supposed to do? Do they know who they are supposed to inform, right? That chain of command, communication. Maybe there are certain playbooks in place, right? If you have, let's say, incident response, you're following that. Are those, this RACI models, are they all integrated into that, playbook environment, into the documentations? And do people know, like through this training, learning environment that you have in your organization, do they really know what they're supposed to do? Because sometimes we do document them, we go through the effort and prepare these, but people don't have the necessary training or the, go through that, process, and they don't know. Excuse me. So we need to make sure, and that's that whole holistic approach, that covering the enterprise, the whole from start to finish. So you want to make sure you have that big picture mindset, and whatever you do, right, needs to be done properly so that you can get to the bottom and get to deliver those values for the organization. So who are those people? They might have different titles, obviously different positions, but it might be C-level people, it might be directors, managers, and again, this is a kind of a sample list, and it is all context-based. It might be different for your organization or the other organization, different industries, but the goal here is really you need to have that list, right, mapped to that RACI matrix, and make sure it's documented, communicated properly, and everybody on this list knows what they're supposed to do, their role, their accountability, and supporting and championing and sponsoring all these efforts and initiatives, so that when there's an issue, people know, okay, let's address this in a timely manner, kind of trigger that process so that things get moving, right? Excuse me. I think the other way to deal with issues, you need to make sure you have a structured approach. We'll always have challenges. We'll always have problems. And is there a mechanism in place where you can identify whatever the issue is, whatever the problem is, right? Is there a structural way to deal with that, right? That's what really we're trying to do, right? Can you identify those, whatever those things are, right? That identification mechanism, right? Whether it's cybersecurity you're dealing, maybe it's the assets, maybe inventory, maybe it's the threats, right? Whatever those things that need to be identified, part of the issue, right? Do you have the right way to identify? Is it the right stakeholder, the right people? Are they involved in the process, right? And then same thing, can you assess, right, the implications? What does that mean for that specific thing, right? Whether it's a incident response or whatever that you're assessing, maybe a risk management issue, right? Can you go through that assessment process properly? Are you following procedures, frameworks, documentation, those type of things, right? Are you doing the assessment properly, right? Again, coming back to that, doing the right things in the right way, right? And then response, right? Whatever that, after you identify, assess, whatever that it is you're identifying and assessing, trying to resolve that challenge, issue, problem, the response, the right people in the right way, through the right channels, right communication, timely, is that mechanism in place, right? How do you react? How do you, provide that response to those, outcomes? There's an issue, excuse me, question, what are some ways that we can take also security culture? We do service meetings, are there other ways to ensure security being understood? Security first message. I really think it's the cultural element, right? the pulse of our security culture. Security awareness is a big, I think, element that we need to really focus because everything we do revolves around security. I call it SETA, security awareness training, security education training and awareness, right? We have to make sure we have a good security awareness and training and education program in our place, because as most of you know, this is really not a technical problem. It's not a technology issue, right? It's the technology is the easier part of the equation. It's the people side, it's the soft side is just really a bit more difficult to address, and because of the human element, right? That's why we need to address those through that awareness programs. And again, I'm going to emphasize there are a lot of things you can do, standards, frameworks out there that to address the awareness aspect, to address the security first culture. How do you change that cultural element? How do you address the people element, right? And again, you can always reach out to me later after the session. We can discuss in more detail. And again, these are the critical factors for success, right? You have to have a good understanding of these elements. Do you know the strategy? Are we focusing on innovation, customer focus, growth, right? Cost. What is the overall, big picture, the strategy? It's very important. So if you don't know what that strategy is, right, aligned with the mission, the vision, creating value, everything you do at the bottom level is not gonna, provide that value, right? Because they're not aligned. Do we know the organizational goals that I mentioned, right? What are those? I mean, being compliant, depending on the industry, might be, have a higher priority than maybe cost. Creating service products, being innovative, those type of things, delivering value, digital transformation efforts, right? Customer satisfaction, maybe. So those might be business continuity. Those might be those organizational goals. What are those goals in your own context? And again, understanding the risk profiles, right? There are different types of risks that exist, maybe operational, financial, IT, cybersecurity. And those really are related to the pain points we have, right? In the information and technology related issues, that not being able to deliver service, right? Because of a security incident, but there's a risk. So risk is really that pain point taking place, becoming active, becoming real. So risk profile and information and technology related issues really kind of go together. There's a threat landscape, compliance requirements, role of IT, is it supporting or is it strategic role? The way you source the model of IT, right? In terms of outsourcing, using cloud, agile implement, all these things, right? Are you a first adopter or you follower? The size of the company, very important. So these are all things that you have to take into consideration when you want to kind of create that level of culture, whether it's compliant or depending on where you want to be in that maturity level, right? These things need to be part of the plan, right? And again, there are very different details of these, success factors. And one thing I really want to make sure is that learning is part of it. There's no point reinventing the wheel, right? You want to make sure these elements are addressed within the context with, what we discussed, the different components, right? In a holistic way, right? Creating value, being, tailored in your organization, creating that address and stakeholder needs. So they need to be addressed in a holistic way and make sure the right people are informed with the proper documentation, with the proper maturity levels. And as a result, you get to deliver that value, right? So I appreciate it. I mean, there's so much talk about this topic, obviously, cybersecurity, information security, cultural elements, compliance and maturity and how you create value. But one thing I really want to emphasize, right? This is a very short session. There is, as I kept repeating, right? There's no point trying to reinvent the wheel. And I see some questions there, right? You want to go out there, right? It's all available on the internet. Just search whatever the issue, whether it's an HR issue, project management, cybersecurity, value delivery, whatever the issue, just look for the framework and the standard. Like there are different, known standards and frameworks out there, and go educate yourself, find the right people, and don't try to reinvent the wheel. We have 35 seconds. There's a question. They're the biggest culprits. Well, again, I think the question is the top management, right? It all starts at the top management, at the stakeholder level, whoever or whatever the governing body, right? There's a difference between governance and management, and CEO is most of the time is part of management, but there should be a higher stakeholder, right? Whether it's the board or right, that needs to kind of go from there. So, and it needs to all align with the strategy, and security nowadays is becoming so important. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tolgay, so much. This was a wonderful presentation. We appreciate you being here. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today for a fantastic keynote. And this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Tolgay, thank you so much.
Thank you.